So over the last few weeks, we have been getting this question asked many times that why more than 40,000 Australians are still stuck overseas. And if you have been following the news for a while, you might have noticed that this number has actually been increasing over the months rather than decreasing. And you might be wondering why this is so. So in this video, we are going to give you an answer to this question, why still so many Australians are stuck overseas, and how this impacts international students, and some possible solutions that can fix this situation. So without further wasting any time, let's dive straight into the video. Now if you do a very simple math, there is an average of 6,000 people who can come to Australia at the moment because of the travel caps. And if you do the calculations, for 39,000 people who are stuck overseas, it should take around 7 weeks to bring them back home. It's certainly not happening. In one of our previous videos in October 2020, we discussed that around 20,000 Australians were willing to come back home. But every month this number has been increasing over the last 6 months. And since the start of the pandemic, more than 450,000 Australians have actually come back to Australia. So this thing really puzzles people. How come so many people are still stuck overseas? Now one of the key things happening is that more and more people are interested to come back to Australia. They were probably not interested at the start of the pandemic or during the last year, but since the situation overseas and in other countries are getting worse, many of the Australians are deciding to come back home. And of course, as it's their country, they have a right to come back. And all these people who are willing to come back need Australian government support to bring them home. And one of the reasons for that is a lack of flights. So there are very few flights that are coming to Australia on a weekly basis, and even though if the flight is coming in because of the COVID restrictions, the flight cannot be full in order to bring all these people back home. So there is a very little supply of these seats, and the cost of travel is another factor to consider here. The cost of flying at the moment to Australia is crazy expensive. The other day I got a message from one of the local travel agents here in Australia. In the message it was clearly outlined that the cost of traveling one way from India to Australia is $4,000. So for those people who don't know, to give you a context, in a normal time the same ticket would have costed you between $500 to $800. And that is the cost from traveling from India. But there are many Australians who are stuck in other countries as well. And there is a news about some airlines charging around 50,000 Australian dollars to come back to Australia from certain countries. So that's a ridiculous amount of money that some people have to pay in order to get back home. And when they arrive in Australia, they also have to do a quarantine. And obviously there are limitations on quarantine system as well. And quarantine also costs money. At the moment, it costs around $3,000 for one adult's quarantine for 14 days. If you have an additional adult passenger with you, it will cost another $1,000. And if you have a child traveling with you, it costs $500 for that. And the quarantine capacity itself at the moment is around 6,000 passengers. So that doesn't help either. Now some of you also might be wondering, are Australians going overseas for their holidays and they get stuck over there because of that? To clarify that situation, Australian government has a very strict policy for leaving Australia at the moment. You're not allowed to leave Australia actually for leisure or some holiday purposes. You are only allowed to leave Australia if you are going to travel for work purposes, or if you have a family commitment or some family tragedy. And even for those reasons, you will need an exemption before leaving Australia. So it's not really easy to leave Australia at your will as well, even if you are an Australian citizen or permanent resident. But obviously there are people who have to leave Australia for all the reasons we just mentioned. Most of them, after meeting their commitments, will have to come back to Australia as well. And those numbers also adds up to these stranded overseas numbers. So how do we find this information about how many people are actually stuck overseas? So there is no official information given on any Australian government at the moment regarding the number of Australians who are stranded overseas, but we usually get this update in the National Cabinet meeting that occur usually on a monthly basis. So after National Cabinet meeting, we get to know how many Australians are still stuck overseas. But if you want some information regarding people traveling to or from Australia, you can check Australian government's website known as Smart Traveller, where you can find more information about traveling to and from Australia. As I said earlier, it's very restricted for traveling to Australia and from Australia as well. So what impact does this have on international students? So obviously there is a huge impact of Australians stranded overseas for international students. The larger the number is, the longer it will take to bring these people back home, and longer it will take for international students to come back to Australia as well. As Australian government has been clear on this from the very beginning, that they want Australians to come back home before they start bringing international students or any other temporary visa holders. So unless all these Australians who are stranded overseas can be brought back safely to Australia, it won't be possible for international students to come back to Australia unless something else changes. So what are the possible solutions to this situation? As this number keeps on increasing, some of you might be thinking like it will take forever for you to come to Australia if you are an international student. So what are the possible solutions to this problem? Now the first and the foremost solution could be the increase in the travel caps. At the moment, around 6,000 Australians can come back home every week. So certainly to bring more people back home, this number has to be increased. And with the rollout of vaccination in Australia, there is a hope that with the vaccination process in place, that Australia could be able to open its border for more people to come in. There is certainly a talks for travel bubble with various countries at the moment, including Singapore and Fiji. Although Singapore has been very clear on this, that they won't be the quarantine hub for international students or other temporary visa holders for Australia, but it is certainly a positive step in the right direction. Now the other solution could be to set up a national quarantine facility. As more and more people are willing to come to Australia, to increase the quarantine facilities, it might be worthwhile for the government to invest in a national quarantine facility. They already have some facilities available in Northern Territory, which they have been using for a while. If they can use some of the other existing facilities available as well and set up a national quarantine facility, that can certainly boost up the number of people who can arrive in Australia. There is a push for this from the opposition party in the parliament as well, asking the Commonwealth government to take on more people on their national quarantine facility. So that was a quick wrap up regarding this whole saga of Australians stranded overseas. Now a month ago, we launched Overseas Student Guide 2021. If you haven't downloaded already, I highly suggest you to go and download that guide. The guide covers more than 130 pages of high quality content that you need to know about studying in Australia, and it's available for free from our website. More than 2,000 people have already downloaded this guide from our website. We don't want you to miss out on this information. We hope you find this information useful. As always, we look forward to your comments in the comment section below. Please let us know about your thoughts on this. And thank you for watching. See you in the next one.